The 30th of June, Ukrainian ballistic missiles strike Moscow. The third phase of Operation Web. Guys, are you filming this? Yes! Unbelievable! Moscow airports are closed. Sabotage and gunfire near the Kremlin. Muscovites are in a panic. Evacuation has begun. What's happening? The cops are running. And the rockets just keep coming. Boom! That's an explosion. Bada boom! That's a blast. The SBU is preparing new sabotage operations on Russian territory. Girls! We're screwed! Moscow, Saint Petersburg, get ready to evacuate. At 3:46 or something, the sirens started blaring. Thank you to our dear authorities for our cloudless life.
Breaking news, friends. Sabotage and gunfire in the Kremlin. The conspirators have been caught. Moscow airports are closed. Ukrainian missiles and Western rockets target Moscow.
There you go, there you go, there you go. No panic, calm down.
Petersburg, Moscow, Kremlin. Get ready. We'll discuss all this with top analyst Oleksandr Demchenko right now. There's constant chaos at Moscow airports because here's an infographic of Moscow airport closures over the past 6 days. It's just terrible, absolutely terrible. Vnukovo was closed 9 times, Sheremetyevo 4 times, and Domodedovo and Zhukovsky nearly 20 times each. Muscovites are truly in a panic. How do you assess the possibility of Taurus missiles targeting Moscow, the Kremlin, Vnukovo, Domodedovo, and Sheremetyevo?
I think German missiles, and not just German ones, are flying toward Moscow and Saint Petersburg, toward major cities of the Russian Federation. I believe the area near the Russian General Staff on Frunzenskaya, close to Arbat, will go up in flames. I think other important locations will also go up in flames, Red Square, which for some reason Putin and his entire entourage have been making a fuss about lately. Why do we have to talk about this, Dasha? Because a truly pivotal moment has occurred. This is a turning point. This is a new phase of the war, a new stage. Everyone has perfectly understood that Putin is not just crazy, as Donald Trump said, but that Putin has no intention of backing down and is only going to escalate the situation and escalate it every single day. That's why I assume that the Germans, the French, the British, and the Americans have finally lost their patience and given Ukraine permission to strike Russia with anything possible. And from the very beginning, when they gave this permission, they expected that the strikes would be aimed specifically at the territory of Moscow. It is likely that Europe has decided to destroy and sabotage everything possible in Russia, especially in the capital, because they believe that if massive strikes rain down on Moscow, it will somehow change the course of the war, affect the people of Moscow, make the capital groan, and perhaps prompt the Russian elite to wake up a bit and maybe take a closer look at what Vladimir Putin is actually doing and whether this war is really necessary or not. Let's not rule out a strike on Rubliovka either, because if something is launched toward Moscow, whether it reaches its target or not, Rubliovka is there along the way, as well as other elite cottages and settlements. So anything is possible there. Could even be a strike on Rubliovka in the near future. We can't rule that out either. But what's important to note here is something else. It's clear that if there are massive missile strikes, and we know that Russians like to shoot down drones and missiles even over kindergarten. Just look, recently a passenger plane was almost shot down by Putin. A passenger plane was flying by. It was hit, struck, and almost shot down. Fortunately, everyone survived and nothing happened. Well, it's a good thing for them, obviously. Recently, someone even shot at Putin. You see, on the one hand, they shoot at a passenger plane, and now they're shooting at Putin. But who gave the information? Who passed on the logistics of Vladimir Putin's route? Then we have to talk about the fact that there are conspirators in the Kremlin, that there is a group among Putin's security from the FSO, among the Chekists at Lubyanka, Putin's security service, yes, among those close to Putin, the elite who want him dead and who secretly passed the coordinates to Ukraine. Moreover, we know another very important point. We know, as the British publication The Economist wrote just recently, that Ukraine and its allies have embedded algorithms into drones, just like Russia is currently programming its drones. So, as I understand it, there are engineers at Russian defense enterprises who are against the war, who take and send embedding algorithms, codes, modern day Enigma into the drones, do you get it, and send out information on how Putin makes drones. In other words, essentially, we are witnessing a massive act of sabotage within Russia. Then I just watch the news, Belgorod region. A railway has been destroyed, a huge stretch of track. In the Tula region, a railway, the track itself was destroyed today, just now. What does this mean? It means that Ukraine is disrupting Putin's summer offensive. And I think it will be disrupted in the coming days, within a week, because this is the connection to the Kursk region, specifically the Tula-Kursk route. This is, of course, a direct link to the border area. In other words, this minimizes and neutralizes any further offensive in the Kharkiv direction and accordingly in the Sumy direction. Essentially, what we're talking about is that a series of large-scale, massive sabotage operations is now beginning on the territory of the Russian Federation from the border regions toward Moscow in order to completely neutralize any of Putin's opportunities and destroy any margin of safety in terms of a summer offensive. In other words, Ukraine is disrupting Vladimir Putin's summer offensive by every possible means, by all possible methods. And I am confident that the partisan movement, which was created both before the war and during these last 3.5 years of this large-scale war, is operating and doing so very cohesively. Because if there are massive explosions targeting railways and tracks in the Russian Federation, the offensive and military operations will simply stall. This has happened before in history. You understand? In African countries, massive railway attacks, explosions on railroads, and this has always had a very significant impact on the course of military operations and on the progress of offensive. A very strong impact. That's why German missiles, and not just German ones, we know that everyone has given permission. The French, the British, and even Trump has turned a blind eye to it will fly over Russia, including over Moscow and Saint Petersburg. This will significantly change the war and alter the attitude of the capital towards this war. I think that Muscovites are not like people from Rostov. They're not Uyghurs, you understand? They're not Uyghurs, not Bashkirs, sorry, not all the other guys. These are people who will definitely start to tremble, who will clearly look and think, what is this Putin doing? And I think that the intra-Kremlin, intra-Russian elite will also start to tremble very seriously. They're already trembling because Putin, you see, Shoigu says he's cold and lonely. Patrushev has been silent lately. Medvedev basically never puts down the bottle, together with Gerasimov and probably Masha Sagarova, they're probably drinking as a threesome. So this will have an impact. Massive sabotage operations in the near future will affect the course of the war. As I have been saying for many weeks now, we are entering a new stage of this war is beginning for us. When Trump's peace initiative called Minsk III, freeze of the war, was undermined by Russia, today it is convening a Security Council meeting to discuss how the West is disrupting peace negotiations. Russia is such a peace-loving agent, you see? Russia is trying to achieve peace, but the West keeps sabotaging everything. But in reality, we understand perfectly well that Putin has no intention of making peace. He has no intention of presenting any real plan to resolve this war, these hostilities, and so on. This will be a disruption, and a new stage of the war is beginning, where everyone now realizes and understands that there will be no end for years to come. This is going to last a long time, and it's necessary to significantly raise the stakes in order to rein in the Kremlin dictator.
Dear audience, please like this video and subscribe to my YouTube channel, Dasha Schastlivaya. In the comments, let me know what you think about the fact that Vnukovo, Sheremetyevo, and other Moscow airports have been closed 20 times in the past 6 days, about our unprecedented drone attacks on Moscow, Saint Petersburg, and other regions, and let's say about how good it will be for Muscovites and Saint Petersburg residents when the Taurus missiles start flying toward the two capitals of the Russian Federation. Sasha, regarding that, indeed, Mertz said that this will last for a long time. And about Trump's move. Well, Trump made a statement that, in my opinion, was actually quite mild toward Putin had just called him crazy. Well, he said that he's crazy, yes, and nothing followed after that. Then I read in the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, the New York Times, they write that Trump might impose sanctions this week or he might not. Let's talk about that.
He might impose them, but not the ones that were expected. Look, Dasha, it's actually very simple here. If the Americans suddenly find some courage and impose 50% tariffs on Russian oil, petroleum products, gas, and uranium, the Russian economy will find itself under an embargo, completely shut off, basically, right? Then we could say that Russia would only have a month or two left to continue the war. In other words, this war would end quickly. It would end as soon as tomorrow if Putin were to face this. But they're not willing to do that. Lindsey Graham can come to Istanbul, he can leave Istanbul, he can shout, he can do whatever he wants. Trump isn't willing to do it either. Well, fine. He might introduce the 17,000th package of sanctions. The 17th package, the 18th package, some other package, it doesn't matter at all. It makes no difference whatsoever. This won't stop Vladimir Putin. There are many ways to stop Vladimir Putin. Both Europe and America have these means, and a real sanctions mechanism with these tariffs, with a complete oil embargo, and with measures to directly lower oil prices. Of course, this includes blocking certain straits, negotiating with Turkey so that no components are supplied to the Russian Federation, and no goods are delivered either through Central Asian countries or through Turkey. It will be more complicated with China, of course, but there are other countries where dual-use and non-dual-use goods are shipped. There are plenty of opportunities to really hit Russia, but they aren't taking them, even though they themselves are preparing for war. I mean, the Europeans, the Poles are preparing for war very seriously, and so on. Right now, many people are concerned. What is going to happen in Belarus? Okay, with Trump, everything is clear. Trump talks more about how once on a golf course, a goose bit his special envoy Litkov in the groin. And he later posted that photo than he does about what's really going on with Putin and why he can't reach an agreement with Putin. That's what he doesn't discuss. Putin has lost his mind. Well, fine, he's lost his mind. And then what? Everyone gets it. Everyone has known this for a long time. Everyone knows it's impossible to negotiate with him. So what now? But no steps have been taken. What did they tell us, Dash? They told us that if nothing works out this week and Trump imposes sanctions and they don't work, they won't work. Because once again, they'll be toothless and Trump will pull out of the negotiations. Well, that's exactly what the two of them want. Trump wants to get as far away as possible because he doesn't want to be seen as a loser and a failure. He doesn't want to end up with, let's say, a second Afghanistan for himself. Like how Biden fled from Afghanistan. He doesn't want that kind of situation for himself on a global scale. And for America, it would be an even worse situation. And Putin wants Trump to leave so that America won't help neither Ukraine nor Europe. So that the situation becomes even more complicated. Because Putin believes that then he'll definitely tighten the screws everywhere. He'll definitely push everything through and pressure everyone. I'm very concerned about what's happening now in the north. And what will happen, I mean, the military West 2025 exercises on the territory of Belarus. You know that they had a phone call with Lukashenko, Putin and Lukashenko literally yesterday. He thanked him for the exchange of 1,000 for 1,000, which Lukashenko supposedly organized on the border with Ukraine. It's all nonsense. What it's really about is putting pressure on Lukashenko and most likely sending as many of their military groups as possible into Belarus. And then it's up to chance. They could even attack Kyiv or Chernihiv from the north. No one is ruling out such a threat. I think that after 2022 and February, you'd have to be completely, blind or deaf not to understand that this threat could really exist, that Putin might go for it again. Last time he failed with his blitzkrieg. Why do we think that this time he wouldn't want to avoid failing at another blitzkrieg, having corrected some mistakes and worked things out? But on the other hand, of course, no one is ruling out further provocations from Belarusian territory against Lithuania or a number of other Baltic countries or Poland. The Poles are preparing very seriously, and so are the Lithuanians. And in general, we have to acknowledge one more thing. Europe has finally switched to a war footing. Europe is now in a state of war. And sooner or later, a big war will break out. And we will see European fighter jets bombing Moscow and other major cities of the Russian Federation because this confrontation is inevitable. Putin cannot take a step back. If he does, his own people will simply remove him. He cannot do it. And the Europeans cannot surrender because they understand what a colossal threat it would be for them if Putin occupies all of Ukraine. He does want to occupy it. Trump has said this. Medvedev has said this. And in fact, Putin himself has essentially said it as well.
Sasha, can Graham go along with Blumenthal? In other words, can the Senate de facto go against the administration's policy, override Trump's veto, and pass a bill by majority vote that would become law imposing hellish sanctions on the Russian Federation?
They can, but they really want to get something from the White House. They really want to get some contracts. They really want to get some preferences for their firms and companies. They really want to make money off something too. And so, if I remember correctly, Graham has been introducing hellish sanctions against Russia for many, many years now, about 7 years. Where are these hellish sanctions? This is not the first bill authored by Graham threatening Russia with hellish sanctions. But there are no hellish sanctions, not from Graham, nor from anyone else. They come up with one package after another. You know, I've come to a thought, a very important one, I think. What if these guys at the beginning of 2023 had given everything to Ukraine, imposed hellish sanctions on Putin, allowed them to strike with long-range missile 7 ATAC back, then helped Ukraine with drone production? Russia would have already lost by now and would be down for the count. And we would be talking about what is happening in Russia, how it is being restructured, how it is falling apart, how the struggle among the elites is unfolding, how the empire is collapsing. But that didn't happen, not during Prigozhin's coup, not amid the chaos and confusion among the elites after the failed blitzkrieg, not during the initial wave of sanctions and the first blows against Putin. Nothing happened. It wasn't Ukraine that missed the moment. Obviously, Ukraine couldn't have produced that many missiles, shells, ammunition, and so on. It's simply that the West, by and large, ahem, was afraid and continues to be afraid. Everything that's happening now, all this blood, all this guilt, aside from Putin, because Putin is, of course, guilty. Putin is a murderer. In that sense, yes, he kills people. Russians kill people. They occupy territories. They destroy homes. They rape. They loot. They abduct children. But those comrades who didn't help all this time, who blockade and support, this is also the doing of Trump and his team back then in the US Congress, who were constantly delaying the provision of ammunition to Ukraine, and they were dithering in Scholz's government. Remember, should we give Taurus missiles or not, give Taurus or not? And should we send Leopard tanks or not send Leopard tanks? And so on, and so on, and so on. While they were dithering, Putin increased both the number of drones and missiles, made deals with the Iranians, got North Korean shells and artillery, and even sent North Koreans dogs to fight against Ukraine. That's why we have the situation we have right now. And this turning point in the war should have started much, much earlier. Let's put it that way, much earlier. It's only happening now, but only now is Europe starting to catch up. And I have a big question. Will it actually catch up?
The fact that Merkel came out and said that this war will last a very, very long time means that Europe has officially admitted its powerlessness against Russia. Because if Europe were to impose the sanctions that actually need to be imposed right now, wise, cut everything off, SWIFT, embargo on oil, gas, uranium, gold, and so on. Remember what Chichvakin said, that if Europe imposes a certain package, those 5 points, then Russia will simply collapse and its economy will collapse. But Europe didn't do that. So in other words, Merz is officially admitting their powerlessness, as if to say, we can't do anything, so Russia will keep fighting Ukraine, attacking Ukraine for many, many more years.
I don't know, maybe Merz isn't as important as, say, Scholz. You see what I mean, right? There's no need to overthink it. In reality, you just need to do two things. Of course, you could do a lot more than that. But two things need to be done. Block the Danish Straits so that no Russian ships, neither shadow nor non-shadow, can pass through in any direction selling this semi-legal oil. That's the first thing. That alone would practically bring everything in Russia to a halt. Everything would just collapse. And second, a blockade of Kaliningrad, both an economic and a military blockade of Kaliningrad, what would Putin do then? Would he go up against NATO? Would it be an actual war? Would he go after the Finns? Would he move against Poland? What would he do? Especially now when all his forces are concentrated on Ukraine. If these things happen, he would surrender. Because losing Kaliningrad, which was handed over to his first and only wife, who now goes by the surname Ocheretina, but back then was Lyudmila Putinashe, currently oversees the Kaliningrad region, that would be a huge blow to him, a very big one. Kaliningrad is not Rostov. It's an important center for Russia. It's a separate concentration of troops, a military grouping, and so on. It would be a colossal defeat if the Baltic fleet were forced to head towards St. Petersburg. It would be a colossal defeat if the entire region were blockaded and all routes for delivering goods, semi-goods, humanitarian or otherwise, were completely cut off. And that's it. And the Danish Strait would be closed. That would be enough to make him back down, drop all his ultimatums, and sign a peace agreement. Yes, that peace agreement would only last for 3 or 4 years. But this pause, which would be absolutely necessary for everyone in this sense, for Ukraine, for the West, including not just for Russia. But that's not happening.
Residents of the Suwalki corridor are living in fear of a Russian invasion, reports Bild. Amid rising tensions, residents of the strategically important Suwalki corridor have begun to leave the region en masse. This was reported by the German newspaper Bild. It is noted that this narrow strip of land 65 kilometers between Poland and Lithuania, which separates Belarus and Kaliningrad, is a vulnerable point in NATO's defense. And military experts believe that in the event of a conflict, the armed forces of the Russian Federation could strike from both sides. Russian artillery capable of firing over 30 kilometers covers the entire Suwalki corridor. What do you think?
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
I ask, where is the army? Where is the unified army that they keep talking about? Fine, there is no unified army. They don't even want to send peacekeeping forces and contingents to Ukrainian levy. They're afraid, they're cowards. To Odessa and so on. All right, so where is the army? Where are the British, French, German armies? Where are the Swedish fighter and artillery systems? Where is the Finnish artillery? Where is the defense? To completely and effectively neutralize any potential threat from Russia and Belarus. So there are a huge number of questions, not just one. Well, all right, let's evacuate the people. But what happens next? Obviously, this is the road to Kaliningrad, a land corridor to Kaliningrad. But it's a small strip, yes, which could separate the Baltic countries from Poland, clearly cut them off. But this strip is extremely vulnerable, even in the event of an advance by Russian troops. And it wasn't for nothing that Sweden was made a party, a NATO member, and so on. Gotland Island, and so on and so forth. None of this happened by accident. But that's not enough now. You see, we can just express our outrage. We can discuss it. All these are obvious things. The question is, now a new stage of the war is beginning. A new phase of the war. So what's next? For Ukraine, it's clear what's next. This war will last a long time. Putin doesn't want to make peace until he runs into problems with the economy, that's 1. With human resources, that's 2. And directly in military terms, that's 3. He will keep going until then. His economy will likely collapse by the end of this year. Everyone is already saying there will be a recession, there will be a downturn, and they'll have to do something about it. This will affect the defense industry. What will happen to oil prices? We'll see. Most likely, they will also collapse in the relatively near future. All of these, one way or another, will also affect the course of military operations, the fighting. But this time needs to be used somehow. Look, I actually view all these things optimistic. Why? Because considering that the Germans have classified not only the transfer of missiles to Ukraine, but also all other equipment, shells, and weapons, and given that they have now authorized strikes on any reachable targets, this indicates that they have internally decided that war with Russia is inevitable and that they need to fight. They don't want to fight themselves. They don't want their soldiers to go and fight against Russia. And they have decided that it is necessary to fully supply the Ukrainian soldier with everything needed to destroy Russia, or more likely to neutralize it. I think they have bet on neutralizing Vladimir Putin and his regime. The only question is, how long will it take?
This is a very interesting piece of news. Today, even on Nastoyashi Vremya, you showed it too. It has spread across all the Telegram channels. There you go. The people will tear you apart with their bare hands. The wives themselves will come and tear you apart. That's a quote. So a volunteer showed how Russian soldiers on crutches, of course, are being kept in the basement of the 5th MSB to be sent on a deadly assault. So the widow of a fallen soldier and volunteer of the Russian World Movement, the pro-Russian Anna Uvarova, published a video with soldiers who are members of the 5th Separate Motorized Rifle Brigade. And she goes on to say that they are planning to liquidate them, dispose of them, and that no one is going to just sit and wait for them to come back as Cargo 200. No one but Putin can stop this. There's also a lot of swearing in there. And she said that they are sending the Russians to slaughter. And if anything happens, the people will tear you apart with their bare hands. The wives themselves will come and tear you apart. And in general, it's the officials who should be dying, not ordinary Russian soldiers. You are taking away our husbands, fathers, and children. You are the cattle who should be leading the way ahead of all the guys, but you're hiding out. End of quote. Do you think the people won't rise up? The people will tear you apart with their bare hands. The wives themselves will come and tear you apart. Now, here's another quote. And this is just a small, faint warning bell that you shouldn't pay any attention to at all. Or is this the beginning of a powerful confrontation in Russia against the Kremlin?
This isn't a warning bell. It's nothing. There once was a truly important movement during the first Chechen war, when the mothers of conscripts, the mothers of the mobilized, came and demanded that Yeltsin put an end to it. And Yeltsin did end it, because it was a very strong, unified movement. And back then, Russia was completely different. It was in a half-collapsed, impoverished, dire state. Something had to be done. And of course, a war like that, a war fought for money, a war that was initially led by Korsakov, and the security service had to be ended. Because this part of the population, the mothers, yes, rose up, came forward and said, that's enough. Do you remember when there was a similar situation with the conscripts? Conscripts were sent to war, this time against Ukraine. And the mothers of the conscripts started to speak out, and Putin immediately gave the order to rescue the conscripts and try to smooth over the situation somehow. They are afraid of this movement. They remember what happened during the first Chechen war. They don't want anything like that to happen again. But when we talk, for example, about an initiative like the wives of mobilized soldiers, they banged their pots in the kitchen and that was the end of it. They went out to the Ministry of Defense a few times, were told to keep quiet, and the generals who came out to theme even, the colonels who came out told them to be quiet, and they did. Nothing will come of it in this sense. Why won't anything happen? Because on the one hand, there are these dissatisfied wives of mobilized men whose husbands are being killed. And on the other hand, there are wives like them, but not of mobilized men, of those who paid their way out. She got married, once he was killed, she became a widow, got the money, second time got the money again, third time got the money again. It's a whole business. It's an entire business. They're all bought off. Do you understand what the point is? It's not just some mobilized guy who was grabbed, tied up, sent off, and went to destroy. For the most part, these are people who wanted to get money for going to another territory, to a foreign country, and killing someone. They're willing to kill a person for money. They're mercenaries, just like Prigozhin, who was killed in the sky over Russia. Exactly the same kind of mercenaries, no different from that execution. Only that executioner was getting billions. And these guys get some amount, a few million rubles, which are destroyed by inflation in Russia. The killers just the same. That's why I don't believe in this whole movement of the mobilized soldiers' wives, that they'll come and do something like that. Only Putin's own elite will remove him. Right now, there are probably no conspirators in the Kremlin. They might appear, they might show up. When something collapses, when things start to fall apart, it will be a domino effect. When, as I said, there's a blow to the economy, a blow to oil, a blow at the front, and so on, things will fall apart and Putin will be removed. But he understands perfectly well that he has no other way out of this situation except to keep waging war. Because as long as he keeps waging war, Dasha, he can keep resetting everything and everyone. You've already heard once again from Tolstoy in the State Duma that they're planning to reset the constitution again, to rewrite the constitution, which he already reset back in 2020. They're planning to reset it even more, to tighten things further. And what will follow after the constitution is reset? Repressions, mass purges. For example, Shoigu is afraid, I'm absolutely certain, to go out on the streets of Moscow. Did you know he has 14 bodyguards who accompany him?
Yes, I just wanted to discuss that why he wasn't at the parade and why in September, October of last year, he suddenly increased his security detail to the number you mentioned. What is the reason for this? And a publication wrote that he's afraid of internal enemies, internal ones. Sasha?
He's afraid of Putin. He's afraid of Putin. He stole money right under Putin's nose. He didn't share that money. Why did the confrontation arise between Prigozhin, Shoigu, and Gerasimov on the other side? Because of money? I was told the amount was $6 billion. That was the sum involved. They couldn't split it. A confrontation began, which escalated to the point where Putin had to urgently leave, to flee Moscow. He packed his things, got on a plane, and left. Because his life was in danger. At least that's what they thought. Or maybe they made up that danger for him. Because Prigozhin didn't want to kill Putin,
Of course.
it all just fell on him out of nowhere. He wanted to deal with Shoigu and Gerasimov. He had to have Putin killed by Patrushev using Prigozhin's hands. The Wall Street Journal wrote about this. It's not something I made up, that it was Patrushev who actually killed Prigozhin. Patrushev was sidelined after that, sent off to deal with ships. Shoigu's people were eliminated. 8 out of Shoigu's 10 deputies are under arrest in prison. One of Shoigu's deputies, the 9th one, is missing. She was the one in charge of the money. Now they want to get rid of Gerasimov, to dispose of him, because he's also part of the conflict. And Shoigu walks around now, surrounded by 14 bodyguards. 14 bodyguards. He walks around in fear, and he doesn't just say he's cold and lonely. Shoigu knows perfectly well that tomorrow he might not wake up. He knows perfectly well that Putin could kill him. There are a huge number of people who want to finally tear apart Shoigu's empire. They've practically already done it. Because Shoigu isn't just the Ministry of Defense and contracts like those of Timur Ivanov. Shoigu is also the Ministry of Emergency Situations, which he protected an enormous agency. You understand? Shoigu, yes, that's the Ministry of Defense. Shoigu, yes, that's the contracts. Shoigu, yes, that's all sorts of corrupt schemes. Shoigu is the construction of Patriot Park for 20 billion rubles, which they embezzled 20 billion rubles that they stole. Shoigu is about buying and selling weapons. Shoigu is about making money at the front, sending drugs to the front, sending prostitutes to the front, black market weapons that were funneled to terrorists, to the Taliban, and so on. Shoigu was involved in this at the initial stage and made money from it together with Gerasimov and his generals. And he didn't just get those bodyguards for nothing. He fully understands that Putin will take revenge on him for Prigozhin. Putin most likely had to kill Prigozhin. He gave that order. But I think that now he really regrets that he was forced to eliminate a person whom he believed was working very effectively. And he will seek revenge, and Shoigu knows this perfectly well.
So this summer could be decisive for many players essentially connected to Prigozhin and the Russian army.
I think so. Now, Kadyrov started talking. He released some kind of video, whether he's sick or not. He was also part of this game. He didn't make it there at the time. That's it.
I wanted to ask about Kadyrov. So now he appeared talking about life and death, but it's all philosophical sayings. Sasha, I listened. For what purpose? Why? Why all of a sudden?
Listen, I think Kadyrov is simply sending a signal. Just a few weeks ago, maybe a month, there were rumors that Kadyrov would soon be removed, right? I think they actually wanted to remove him. He has a huge number of enemies. Yes, he's being held by Zolotov, the head of the National Guard, former bodyguard of Sobchak, and in a sense an aide to Putin. But the FSB is against Kadyrov. Military intelligence is against Kadyrov. The GRU is against Kadyrov. Yes, the Ministry of Defense, the General Staff, the Ministry of Internal Affairs, the investigative committee represented by Bastrikin, the prosecutor's office. These people are against Kadyrov. These are clans that oppose Kadyrov. And now he's simply signaling to them, well, guys, look, I went to see Putin and got the mandate to rule again, and there's nothing you can do to me. I think that's roughly how this necessary signal should be interpreted coming from Ramzan Kadyrov. But all those people who, in one way or another, were involved in this conflict with Prigozhin and in the resolution that concerned Prigozhin have either been neutralized, eliminated, or are under constant pressure of some sort. So yes, the infighting and purges will continue. And Putin's vendetta has not stopped. It will continue, and he will see it through, gradually destroying all of these people. And he will do it. Sasha, our audience is asking you, since we do a stream with you every week, and I've noticed they're writing in, to give a brief forecast of what might happen this week. That is, until our next meeting with you. What do you think? A brief forecast, a mini prediction from top analyst Oleksandr Demchenko. I think that Trump will not introduce anything significant regarding Russia, and he himself will try to get out of the war in the near future. The Europeans will obviously begin urgently supplying Ukraine with missiles and other long-range munitions in order to strengthen its position before the summer offensive. I think that a series of sabotage operations will begin in the near future. We will see a huge number of them in the next week or week and a half at railway junctions, tracks, and so on. And it's worth expecting not in the coming week, but in the longer term, an even greater intensification of drone warfare, both against Russia and against Ukraine. Friends, please like this video. Every week, I meet with top analyst Oleksandr Demchenko, column Sasha plus Dasha. We discuss key events and hope that if there is a top event, we will do a special broadcast. But basically, it is once a week. Friends, subscribe to my channel. Dasha happy. In the comments, write what you think about the situation as a whole, your forecasts, your opinion, your analysis. Oleksandr Demchenko, top analyst. Sasha, thank you very much and see you soon. Thank you. Until next time. Bye.